In today's video, we're going to go through a list of tools that I think are essential to anyone who is battling with foot spasticity, which is interfering with your ability to walk. So the tools we go over today are things that are probably used in most of the videos that I do talking about spasticity and how to improve the quality of your walking if you are someone that has a foot with spasticity. So we're just going to kind of in one video put all of those items into one list. Now, in addition to that, as you all know, I don't like to just give you this black and white kind of formula or list. We are going to go through what foot spasticity is so that you know whether or not these tools are appropriate for you. And then, of course, how I use the tools to enhance someone's quality of movement when it comes to relearning how to walk with as minimal of that foot supination or pointing as possible. If you're new to this channel, I'm Tara. I'm a neurologic physical therapist, and on this channel we talk about anything and everything related to mobility, health, fitness, and mindset in the context of neurologic injury, with the end goal of empowering you with as many tools as possible to take ownership of your rehab and your health, to live an overall more mobile, more active, pain-free, happier, healthier life. Now, before we dive into the video, I want to mention that we do have an exclusive membership program. Those membership programs start at just $5 a month. With your membership, you will get early access to these YouTube videos ad-free. You will also get access to our Discord channel, as well as access to any home exercise handouts that I sometimes have to go along with these videos. So to learn more or to sign up for our membership program, link for that is in the description below. But now let's go ahead and dive into today's video. Now, as I mentioned, I think the best way for this video to impact the appropriate people is for me to give just a brief description on what foot spasticity is. For some of you that are newer to this channel, you may not even know what I mean by that word, foot spasticity. So foot spasticity, or spasticity in general, is just a term that means or is characterized by kind of an involuntary contraction of a muscle. It's exclusive, it's a symptom that's exclusive to someone who has damage to the brain or the spinal cord, or what we call like the upper motor neuron system. So it's not a condition in and of itself, but it is a symptom or a sign that there is damage to the brain or the spinal cord. Now, it's also important to mention, as I don't like to give anyone false hope, that these videos are going to cure anything. Spasticity is one of those things that if you have damage to your brain or your spinal cord, there is no cure for it. However, by improving the brain's connection with the appropriate muscles in the foot or the lower leg, potentially you could decrease the amount of impact that that spasticity or that abnormal contraction is having on your overall mobility. In addition to that, the exercises are super duper valuable for that spasticity not to get worse. So one thing that can happen, in particular with foot spasticity, is that if there's involuntary contraction of certain muscles, and we're going to go through those in a minute when we talk about what foot spasticity is, but if there's involuntary contraction in certain muscle groups, and then there's other muscle groups in the lower leg that are not active at all, then those overactive muscles, or those muscles that are constantly contracting when you don't want them to, or shortening, which is what happens when a muscle contracts, can result in what we call adaptive shortening. So if they're left to just stay contracted all the time or be contracted for the majority of your day, then the muscle just adaptively shortens, and in that case, you can't lengthen it enough to walk in some cases. And in other cases, you can't lengthen it enough to even activate the other muscles that are underactive. So there's a variety of reasons, whether there's a cure for spasticity or not, that engaging in a regular routine that includes exercises to address foot spasticity is super important. Now, what is foot spasticity? Big picture. So generally speaking, most people that have spasticity in their lower leg due to an injury to the brain or the spinal cord, the muscles that are overactive are the gastrocnemius and the posterior tibialis. Now, those two muscles together point the foot down and invert the foot. So what you might notice if you're someone that has foot spasticity or this involuntary contraction due to damage to the brain or the spinal cord is that your foot kind of points down. Sometimes when you're laying down, worse is when it happens when you're walking, but you might notice that that foot's pointing down. The other thing you might notice is that when you're laying down, I've heard a patient call it this, and it is kind of a good example, is that your foot kind of looks like a macaroni noodle. So it kind of points down and it curves inward. That's for those of you that might have severe spasticity where you haven't done a lot of bracing or you don't wear a night splint, anything like that. Your foot can end up in that position. It almost kind of stays in that position. Now, someone that has foot spasticity, the other thing you might notice is that your knee always hyperextends. That's not the only thing that causes knee hyperextension, but it is one thing that we would look at if we notice that your knee is hyperextending is, do you have this involuntary pointing to your foot? The reason that happens is when the foot hits the ground, if the foot points but the ground is in the way, the only other path of least resistance is for the leg to go backwards. So foot, lower leg, the foot points and your foot is on the ground, your lower leg is going to go backwards and that will throw your leg into knee hyperextension. So again, it's not the only thing that causes knee hyperextension, but one area we would look at if you had knee hyperextension is the foot and the ankle. So now, what are the key components of what I think a well-rounded walking program looks like? Is that you start with some exercises devoted or focused on addressing this issue. And the goal for the exercises are to either maintain your range of motion, so make sure that you have adequate ankle dorsiflexion, so you have to stretch those muscles that are overactive in order to achieve that, so maintaining adequate range of motion. 2, the goal would be that if you are someone that wants to work on lifting the foot, so the muscles on the opposite side of the joint, we want those muscles to easily lengthen on the back. So how do we do that? We engage in a regular activity where we're lengthening those muscles on the back of the leg. Next, we want to work on exercises to activate the muscles on the front of the leg. Remember, the more connection you have with that lower leg, the less that spasticity is going to interfere with movement, or it might decrease the severity of the spasticity a little bit. So, and this is important because this is going to lead into some of the tools that we focus on. And then the final component that I think is essential for kind of what I would term your walking portion of your home exercise program is that you can stand on the leg or load the leg without the foot pointing. So in a lot of cases, if you have spasticity, loading the leg does cause that spasticity to kick in, or can cause that involuntary contraction. Now, why does that happen? Well, one component or one trigger of spasticity is a quick stretch. So spasticity is a type of tone that we consider is velocity dependent, meaning the faster that a muscle lengthens, the stronger or the potential you're going to have for a stronger recoil or contraction in the opposite direction. So if you rapidly flex the ankle, that rapidly lengthens that gastrocnemius on the back, which is the muscle that is involved with spasticity, and the gastrocnemius points the foot. So it's going to recoil or respond by pointing that foot even harder. So we need to learn how to load the leg and kind of get the body to adapt or adjust to the foot hitting the ground without that spasticity kicking in. So we go through a variety of exercises loading that leg. Now, one key factor that interferes with a lot of foot movement is that posterior tibialis I mentioned at the beginning, and that really inverts the foot or pulls the foot inward. And if you have spasticity, then you probably already know this. What that does is it forces your foot to roll to the outside, your knee goes out to the outside. So in addition to just loading that leg and not having that spasticity kick in, if you're someone where you've been on the outside of your foot for a while, we also want to learn how to load the leg and having all the bones stacked up on top of each other. So if you are someone that you stay on the outside of your foot. Well, when you're in this position, those bones aren't really stacked up on each other. And that's going to get into why I selected some of the tools for this video. So what we want to make sure that we do is that we load that leg with all of the bones lined up on top of each other the way that they should be. So the first set of tools that we're going to go through are tools that stretch the back of the muscle. The second set of tools that we're going to go through are tools that you can use to load that leg, ensuring that all of the bones or the leg bones are lined up the way that they should be. All right, so I hope all that makes sense. Let's go ahead and dive into the list. All right, now the first thing that we're going to talk about, and a lot of you guys have seen me use these in a lot of videos, but I want to describe the difference. So there are two different wedges that I have here. Now, the nice thing about this one is that it's a little bit bigger, and it will be good for some of the stretching that we do to stretch the lower leg out. Now, the other wedge I have here, which I don't show as much for like self-stretching, is this wedge here. The thing I like about this wedge is it does have rubber on the bottom. Now, I've done a whole video on this, and I will link this in the video description below, but I've done a video where I talk about how caregivers might be able to help someone stretch by doing some like kind of ankle joint mobilizations. And that's what I really like this wedge for, because it has a rubber bottom on it. It doesn't slide as much. Now, the reason I don't necessarily think you need it if you don't have someone to help you with stretching is I think this wedge is more versatile. So, and this one's a little bit more expensive. So again, this one, I will link the video in the description below, but I do think it's a valuable type of wedge if you are someone that can help you with some of the joint mobs that I show in that video. So that just gives you an idea of why I'm giving two different wedges in this video. Okay, so you want to learn joint mobs, watch the video for this one, but now let's go ahead and dive into all the ways that you can use this wedge to kind of prepare your body for walking without that spasticity potentially being as severe when you try and get up and stand and walk. All right, so for those of you that have been around for a while, you know that the stretch that I promote the most if you have foot spasticity is just straight dorsiflexion. Remember, I'll repeat it several times just for for those of you that aren't that familiar with the anatomy. Remember, the gastrocnemius is the muscle on the back of the leg. That's usually the muscle that's overactive, that one of the muscles that causes that foot to point. So what we want to do is make sure that we don't allow that muscle to adaptively shorten. Best way to do that is to stand on a wedge. Now, stretches, you want to make sure that you hold for at least a minute would be ideal. Now, the other thing for those of you that have true foot spasticity is to address that posterior tibialis. So remember, I said there's one muscle that's overactive that points the foot down. There's another muscle that has a tendency to cause that foot to turn in. Now, in order to stretch that muscle, my suggestion is that you also stretch your foot just with the wedge straight out to the side, really stretching that posterior tibialis. Now, one thing I want to address in this video that I probably have never addressed in any other video is that if you're someone where you have a knee that looks like kind of like crooked or looks like it's bent when you look at it from the front, be very careful as to how much you turn that foot down. Now, for those of you with severe spasticity, it most likely isn't a problem because most of you are kind of stuck in this position. But if you are someone that notices that, you do have to be careful. You don't want your knee, you don't want to be overly stressing the inside of that knee by putting that foot too high on a wedge. The other thing is you definitely probably don't want to do this if you're someone that wears an AFO, because that will kind of throw your leg into that, what we call knee valgus position. So you want the knee maybe slightly more towards like the big toe, but not severely going past the big toe, right? So you don't want like this position, but you don't want this position. So a happy medium I usually find is just to kind of have it like kind of slightly over the big toe. So for some of you, that might mean that when your foot's just barely on the wedge, your leg is like this, and then I would say that in that case you'd want to move your foot up the wedge just a little bit. But if you just have a little bit of a lift on the outside of that foot, and your knee either stays neutral, then that's really where you want to stop. You don't want to go to a point where your knee is caving inward. Okay, so that's stretch number 2 with this first tool that we're going over. Then the last stretch is having that wedge kind of off at an angle, like a 45-degree angle, and that kind of combines the two. So it kind of combines the muscles that turn the foot in, and it kind of addresses the gastroc, which points the foot down. So 45-degree angle, and then you're just going to push those hips forward. Now I'm showing this to you from the front so that you can see the angle of the wedge. So we did it straight on in the front, we did it straight in from the side. Now we're kind of off at that 45-degree angle a little bit with the wider side kind of angled out more towards the pinky toe. And then you're just going to lean forward, push your hips forward, and again you want to hold this for 1 minute. All right, and then my next favorite tool, still sticking with stretching, is a low stool. Now, I use this stool a ton. If you've been around for a while, you kind of already know that. So I do think it's a valuable investment. It's sturdy, it doesn't tip over, it has a handle so you can use it for other exercises. And the reason I think this is such a valuable tool is because it addresses an exercise that I love that I think most people with spasticity neglect, either because you think you can't get into this position or it's just too challenging to get into this position. But it is probably one of the most valuable stretches that you can do on your own to address that foot spasticity, and it really just comes down to physics. When you're in this position and your knee is maximally bent, it does put a little bit more slack on that gastroc. So what this does, and I've talked about this in other videos, is there's the muscle component of spasticity, but then spasticity that is severe and long lasting, meaning you've had it for a really long time, starts to get the muscle or the bones in the ankle joint to not really sit where they should. And so if you are someone that has gastroc tightness, the reason that happens is because your gastrocnemius, or the muscles on the back, are so shortened that you never get into this position. And so in order to kind of mobilize those bones in the ankle a little bit, we just want to take the gastrocnemius out of it. It doesn't have the length right now, which for some of you that is the case, but we still need to be working on the overall bone mobility, or how those bones glide on each other in the ankle joint. So in order to do that, we get in a super flex position at the knee that puts the gastrocnemius on slack and allows us to achieve what we call normal ankle dorsiflexion range of motion. So that's one, is that physics takes the gastroc out of it. The other reason I like it is because you can get a lot of body weight over a very small area. So notice my hips, my shoulders, every ounce of my body weight, for the most part, is directly, is a force that's going directly down kind of through that heel and really allowing me to kind of deepen that stretch. So it's very hard to kind of cheat or compensate in any way. All of that force goes directly into achieving that ankle dorsiflexion. So for this one, you just want to squat all the way down, and then you might be kind of like this. And then the way that you deepen that stretch is you just kind of scoot your bottom forward. You can see the further I scoot my bottom forward, the more that I'm going into that ankle dorsiflexion position. All right, and then the next tool we're going to go over, and this is a relatively new tool that I found on Amazon, and this is kind of like a toe stretcher. So a long time ago, I did a video on how to make something to stretch your toes, but I actually found something that I think is reasonably priced that does a better job. So first, let's talk about why it is important to do the toe stretching. For some of you, it's a no-brainer if you have spasticity, because you tell me this. One of the things that's the most annoying is that your toes are always curling. And yes, that is common just after having a stroke in general, but it's also very common if you have a lot of foot spasticity. So the nice thing about this tool is it does stretch your toes towards extension. Now, to really get like the most optimal stretching of your ankle muscles, you really want to incorporate all the muscles that run along the bottom of the foot, because they can compensate a little bit. You're still getting a decent stretch with the stretches we've already done, but if your toes stay curled when you try and flex your ankle, it's kind of like it's not the maximum stretch, because your toes are kind of compensating by curling under for some of the tightness in that gastroc. So why does this happen? The gastrocnemius comes down and attaches to the heel bone, and then the heel bone has muscles that run along the bottom of the foot, and so when the calf is tight, it doesn't lengthen enough, by the toes curling under, it allows that heel bone to kind of stay back a little bit so that you don't have to really lengthen that gastrocnemius as much. Long story short, if you can, you do want to incorporate some sort of a dorsiflexion stretch with the toes extended to really get the best stretch for your ankle. Now, what I love about this tool is that it's first heavy. So you don't want something that kind of slides around on the ground, which is a problem with like the foam wedge that I've shown and some other things, is it's pretty heavy and it's got rubber on the bottom, and so it does stay in place, which is what I love. The other thing that I love is there's two adjustments here. So you can kind of keep one side up and let the other side drop down. Now, I don't think it's really important for me to go into all the details as to why this is important, but you do, to get the most stretch, is you want the great toe to extend, but you want really the rest of the toes, especially if you're working on loading that foot, to kind of stay in a more natural position. So with this, you can adjust how much stretch individually per toe. And then in addition to that, underneath here, I don't know if you can see it, but there are numbers on here, so it kind of will tell you how much the angle that this is up. There's little numbers down here, and whatever little notch you put it in, it kind of tells you how many degrees of extension you're getting. So if you're someone that wants to track your progress, numbers are always great for that. Okay, so this is called the dorsiflex, and I will put a link for this in the description below. All right, so now let's go ahead and go into how you use this. You just set your foot up on the incline, and then you want the bend in your ankle, kind of like the ball of your foot, kind of right at the bend on that board. Big toe, you want a little bit more extended, and then you want the rest of your toes kind of in a more natural position. And then to start, you just want to lean forward. Push those hips forward a little bit, dorsiflexing that ankle. And then if you wanted to add some loading without those toes curling, which we're going to go into loading in the next section, but you can add like a little forward-backward step. However, before you get to this, I do recommend that you do the loading progression that we're going to do next, but that is another way to use this tool. All right, now we're going to get into tools that I think are helpful when loading a spastic leg. So some things that we want to be thoughtful of when we are experiencing some involuntary pointing and rolling to the outside when we're loading the leg is that in some cases, when you load a spastic leg, it's going to make the spasticity worse. So it's good to prepare in advance for things to get a little bit more challenging with the foot and the ankle when you're standing and walking. So some people, what this is they experience more pain when they're standing and walking and don't really know why. Some people feel like they're more off balance, or that their body is kind of being thrown in a direction that does not feel normal. Those are just some signs, potentially. There's other things that can cause that, but those are just some potential signs that maybe you do have some increased spasticity when you are standing, or what I would say anytime you're loading that leg. So the other things that we want to think about if this is the case is, what are the positions that we want to be mindful of, or what's like the normal position and what's the abnormal position, and how do we move closer to a more normalized position and thus have the spasticity be less intrusive in our walking and standing. So in most cases, the two abnormal positions are pointing or throwing your body weight backwards. The other thing that goes along with involuntary pointing is that the knee hyperextends. So right now we're going over a list of kind of like suboptimal positions or movements that we want to try and prevent. The other one is the knee going out to the side or the foot rolling. And for some of you, when I say you feel like you're being thrown off in one direction, that could be the cause, is because you're actually standing on the outside of your foot. So that's another kind of suboptimal position that we want to pay attention to and try and correct as much as possible. And the last one is, and a lot of people are experiencing this but don't really know how to identify it or what it is if your entire leg tremors. Now there is a lot of reasons that your leg might tremor. The spasticity is only one, and it's not like the main reason why a leg will tremor after a stroke. But we call this clonus. So if you have clonus, it's when the foot just kind of beats like this. It's a kind of an involuntary contraction, repetitive contraction of the calf muscle or the muscles that point the foot. This is elicited by a quick stretch, or that's how we test clonus, is we rapidly flex the ankle, and if we get this downbeat with the foot, that is a positive sign for clonus. If you are someone that has clonus and your foot hits the ground, sometimes because of just the way that physics works and how that motion propagates up the leg, people will tell me it feels like their entire leg is shaking. The way to know that if you have this is to work with a therapist, ask your doctor, or just have a family member with you sitting and completely relaxed and with your knees bent, so you can be sitting in a normal position but slightly elevated so your feet are off the ground. Have a family member just pull your foot up really fast. If it beats downwards like repetitively, then we would call that clonus, and that might be why your entire leg feels like it's tremoring when you stand on it. So what is normal, or what are some things based on what we know are the potential abnormal movements? What are some potential ways that we want to normalize movement, and what does that normal movement look like? So with that list of abnormal in mind, one thing that we want to do is we want to try and find ways to keep the knees in when you load the leg. So you guys have heard me talk about this a lot before, but now we're going to go over the actual tools that help with that. So that's one set of tools that we will need, is how do you keep the knees in? The other set is how do you keep the knee unlocked, so not allowing the knee to lock out, and we have tools for that. And then also, if you have a lot of inversion, or that you walk on the outside of your foot, we do need tools to not allow that to happen. So what we want to do is kind of force more of the weight towards the arch of the foot, and there are tools for that. Now there's one other thing that is important to note that is important because of some of the tools that we're going to go over, is that sometimes not loading a leg with your center of mass directly over the foot can result in the foot rolling out, and that's just because you don't have your full body weight on that leg. So for example, if you are someone that you keep your involved leg outside or to the outside of your base of your center of mass when you're loading that leg, or your center of mass stays way over to the other leg, then that too can make spasticity worse. And this is a little bit complicated, and I don't really think I have like a good explanation for it. It just happens. So one thing that is really important is to get comfortable loading a leg directly over the top of the leg. So we've got a few tools that are going to address that, but I'll kind of go through that as we go so that you know which tools to use. So if you're someone that you are doing that, you'll kind of be able to identify which tools are best for you. So let's go into the tools. And some of this is not new for those of you that have been around for a while, but the first two tools that we're going to talk about is a strap and a yoga block. And again, if you've been around for a while, you have heard me and seen me demonstrate this before, but they are so valuable. So yoga block between your feet, strap around your knees. Now remember, and it is worth repeating because I did just see someone in this situation, so it's really top of mind right now for me, is that if you are someone where your knees cave in, do not force your knees into this position. Okay, you can have spasticity and your knees can still cave in. Do not force this position. This position is intended for those of you when you walk and someone videos you or you walk in front of a mirror, your knee looks like it is bent outward like this. Like your knee looks like it is bent outward. Then this set of tools might be beneficial. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to keep the feet a little bit wider because your involuntary or subconscious compensation, which I've seen quite a bit, you don't even realize you're doing it, is for the for you to just kind of move your feet close together because it's more comfortable because then your knee can go out. So that's why the yoga block's important. It really emphasizes bringing that knee in and bringing that weight. So if I drew a line straight down from the heaviest part of my body, my center of mass, straight down, that weight is to the inside of the foot. So we're trying to stop the foot from rolling out, stop the knee from going out, and load the leg, okay? So in that position, now you're just going to, if this is the involved leg, we're going to load the leg by just forward, backward stepping with the other leg. You can see that if you're someone where your leg is going to want to do that, you're not going to be able to move your leg because you're going to hit that yoga block. So if the yoga block keeps kicking out from under you, then I would say don't step the foot forward yet. Work on loading that leg and just lifting your heel. Okay, so if you can't clear the yoga block when you step your other foot forward, don't move on to that because what's probably happening is that your leg is going out and that this foot's coming in and hitting the yoga block. So the goal is that you can clear the yoga block without moving the yoga block. If you can't do that, you're just going to work on a weight shift with a heel lift. Again, this setup is for those of you where your leg goes out to the side and you want to normalize your leg movement with loading. These two tools together, the yoga block and the strap, will help with that. So shift and lift. Shift and lift. Once you can do that, shift, lift, and step. Shift, lift, and step. Shift, lift, and step. All right, now the next tool is something called a level up or an even up. It's called an even up. It's made for people that are in a cast. You put it on the opposite foot to kind of even your legs out. So it is elevated. Now, this tool goes on your uninvolved foot. All right, so now this tool is on the uninvolved foot. What is the benefit of this? Well, it's twofold. One is that there is some evidence. They've done some studies with some pressure plates underneath someone's feet after a stroke or someone who's recovering from a stroke and found that when they elevate the uninvolved leg, there is a tendency to spend more time on the involved leg. So remember when I mentioned that sometimes your foot might be out to the side if you have a lot of spasticity, that's usually a common compensation. The other common compensation is that you take a very short step on that leg. One, maybe because you don't have the dorsiflexion in the involved leg to take a bigger step with this foot. But the other reason is because your foot's pointed, it just pushes you backwards or doesn't allow you to come forward. So those are the two reasons why that might happen. Now, what this does is it kind of, the way that I think about it or visualize it in my head, when you're standing on your uninvolved leg, you kind of just fall onto your involved leg. So people have a tendency, like you can see my body weight, it's almost the natural tendency is that it has to go, it falls over that involved foot. So that's where this can become beneficial, is to walk with this level up under your uninvolved foot. Again, this is for that problem or suboptimal movement I talked about where the foot's way out to the side and you're really not putting any weight on it. You put this under your foot. There is some evidence, and I've seen it, it works, that you will stand a little bit longer on that leg. So that would be the benefit of this even up if you are someone who has spasticity in your foot, and it's why it made the list of tools for this video. All right, the next tool that made the list is a Swedish knee cage. Now, I know I'm wearing a black Swedish knee cage in this video. I don't recommend the black one on Amazon. It works for me here because I don't use it very often, and I'm doing a lot of manual cueing with patients that I see in person. When patients have used this on their own, the black one is made of plastic and it breaks. So there's just too much force for the plastic. The white one is metal, and I highly recommend that if you're going to go the Swedish knee cage route, even though it's more expensive, that you do purchase the white one. But now, what does a Swedish knee cage do? Swedish knee cage has a actual bar, a very, very strong bar that goes right behind the knee. It's padded, so it's not uncomfortable. And then a strap that goes above it and below it in the front of your knee. And what it does is it keeps your knee unlocked. So you can see if I'm someone who I hyperextend because my foot is pointing, now all I really have to do is focus on getting my hips over my foot, and my ankle's going to dorsiflex. So do you see that? Let me show you on this side. So if I'm hyperextended, or if my foot's pointed, that could potentially lead to knee hyperextension. When I bend my knee, look what happens to my ankle. It dorsiflexes. It flexes, right? So if you're someone who absolutely cannot dorsiflex your ankle, now, can you get around that and not let the foot dorsiflex? Yeah, you just keep your weight back. And I've definitely seen that in some people that they do have a tendency to do that. However, if all you have to think about is getting your weight over the foot, you let the brace do the rest of the work. So it really minimizes the amount of thinking that has to go into walking and will get you more to that automatic stage. The other reason, speaking of automaticity, the other reason I usually recommend a Swedish knee cage is if someone they can do fine, they can do the crouch walking that I talk about a lot, they can keep their knee unlocked in their home and walk and everything's great, but every time they go out in public, they go right back into that knee hyperextension. That's gonna happen for some of you because you're trying to get somewhere. So to have to really think about keeping your knee unlocked when you're actually trying to mobilize or get from point A to point B, it's just too much. So putting something like a Swedish knee cage on where all you have to think about is just get my hips forward, and then the brace will help with the ankle movement, then I believe it's a beneficial tool for that situation. The other situation is if you just absolutely cannot get your knee to unlock because your pointing is so strong, then it is beneficial to do that. Of course, the best thing to do is to have an AFO with a plantar flexion stop, which I've talked a lot about in a ton of videos. For those of you that are new, I'm not going to go into in-depth in that, but it's basically just an ankle brace. What a plantar flexion stop is on an AFO is it doesn't let the brace point, and they can set that in any amount of degrees, usually like 10 degrees of dorsiflexion. When you can do that, then that also will allow your walking to become more automatic without you having to think so much about keeping the knee unlocked. So first line of defense is an AFO with a plantar flexion stop. I think that's the best way to do it because with an AFO you can control the ankle and the knee. However, I know some of you are really opposed to bracing, or even with your AFO on, your knee still hyperextends. That's when I would use a Swedish knee cage. The reason I would start with the AFO is because it's annoying. It's either going to go over your pants or under your pants. If it goes over your pants and going to the bathroom, pulling your pants down, things like that, it's not super ideal. And for a lot of people, because it's so bulky, it doesn't fit underneath your pants. And then the other reason that I don't think it's ideal, like I do think the AFO is better, is when you bend your knee, it slides up and down. They do make one that's hinged, but I just don't feel like it works as well, and it's a little bit more bulky. So you're constantly adjusting it. So it's not the best, but I would say as a training tool, if you're someone that has spasticity and you really are having difficulty keeping that knee unlocked because your foot is pointing, I do think it is a valuable tool. All right, and then the final tool is a toe separator. So this is a fairly large toe separator. I really like this bigger version because it keeps your toes further apart. So what a toe separator does is when you separate your toes, there is some kind of like relaxation of the intrinsic muscles of the foot, which will stop toe curling. When you can prevent toe curling, sometimes that'll minimize the spasticity higher up in the leg. And basically you just put this on. And again, I do prefer the bigger one, even though it is a little bit of a pain to get on. You usually do need help to put it on. And the reason I like the bigger one is that it does kind of lift your toes up a little bit as well. And then you can work on loading that leg, doing some forward, backward stepping. Now, the reason I included that one in kind of like the loading section is I feel like it works best with loading activities. Like some people do use it just kind of when they're laying in bed or sitting or doing other activities. I don't think it's as beneficial as to using the toe separator when you are doing some kind of a loading activity. The other reason it's in the loading section is they do make a smaller version that will fit inside of shoes. I'll put a link for that one in the description below as well. And so then you can use it while you're doing some of your gait training or just walking in general. The shoes with the biggest toe box are usually New Balance and Asics. Nike typically don't have a big enough toe box, or they're not the biggest toe box, and you really want to kind of find a shoe that has like the largest toe box, so to give your toes the freedom to spread out with that toe separator on and inside your shoe, or on your foot inside your shoe. And then that is it for this video. I hope you guys found this video helpful. Do I think every one of you needs all of these tools? Absolutely not. And that's why I gave an explanation for each tool and kind of my thought process depending on the type of spasticity and how it's interfering with movement. I think is extremely valuable. So hopefully you listened to some of my explanations so that you're not wasting your money on things that might not be the best tools for you. If you're new to this channel and you haven't yet subscribed, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and turn on that notification bell so that you will get notified every time I upload new videos. If you want to get videos throughout the week, head on over to Instagram where I post 1 to 2 videos every single week to help keep your home exercise program new and interesting and just add a little variety to that. If you wanted to go a little bit deeper, we do have a couple of membership programs that gives you access to ad-free versions of these videos, PDFs and handouts that I might mention in these videos, as well as access to our Discord community. And beyond that, it just really helps to support this channel and allows me to continue to produce these videos and make these videos free for the tons of people that don't have access to good neurophysical therapy. So I would appreciate your support. To find out more information about our membership programs, you can visit rehab-hq.com. And then that is it for this video. I enjoyed spending time with you all, and I will see you in the next video. You have a good day.